Hi guys. I'd just like to have a look at something that I mixed a year ago today. It's actually the first version of calibration. You might know that I recently released a concept for calibration that I would like to have performed live with a brass section and a choir. But actually, I wrote the song the last December in 2019. And I'd just like to see how far I've come from then, because there's certainly a lot of things that have changed, not just with the production, but the entire song structure and composition itself. So what we've got here is the spectral analysis of the 2019 version. I'm summing it up as 5 sections. Might be more than that if you were to be quite prescriptive, but since I made the song, 5 sections it is. If we compare that to 2020 version, there's 9 sections here, so there's a lot more happening. And also the duration of the song is just under 4 minutes, whereas the 2019 version is 3 minutes and 17. You might notice, just looking at it, that there's a big dynamic difference. The 2019 version is nowhere near as loud as the 2020 version. Let's have a little look at the loudness control for the 2019 version. So the integrated volume is minus 26 LUFS. That's quite quiet. Let's look at the 2020 version, minus 14.4. So that's about where you want it for a standard Spotify mastering. You want it, roughly speaking, at minus 14 LUFS. The true peak for this 2020 version is a bit too high, but it was never to go on Spotify anyway, so it was something I decided at the time I didn't need to focus on too much. So why don't we normalise the 2019 version so that the reference level is about the same as the 2020 version. We'll see what RX8 can deliver us. Okay, fantastic. Why don't we compare them sectionally? If you want to hear the 2020 version of Calibration, it's a concept track to be performed live, so it's a demo for all intents and purposes. But I feel I've done a good enough job that I've decided to share it with everyone. So if you want to hear the 2020 version, click the link below to go to the SoundCloud where you can view it. So if you want to listen to that version before we get into this, you can head over. But I'm going to do this section by section. So let's listen to the vocal introduction of the 2019 version.
Hello, and thank you for testing our audio calibration service. We here at Caledonia Sound hope you enjoy your experience. Please adjust the volume of your stereo system so that you may hear instructions clearly. This concludes the introduction. We will now test the left channel.
Okay, so that was the introduction for the 2019 version. So you can tell the vocals are just kind of a lot more natural, and there's a nice airport chime at the beginning, and there's some guitar ostinatos going on in the background. So let's compare that with the 2020 version, which I know is a lot different.
Hello, and thank you for using our audio calibration service. We here at Caledonia Sound hope you enjoy your experience. Please adjust the volume of your stereo system so that you may hear instructions clearly. We will now test the left channel.
So that's a drastic difference. You know, the use of effects is a lot more pronounced. So I'm using Sound Toy's Little Alter Boy to downpitch my vocals there to give it almost an authoritative tone. And I've not overdone it. I feel like I've been respectful enough that the vocal isn't horribly robotic or altered in a way that you might find disconcerting. The vocals in this 2019 version, though,
so that you may hear instructions clearly.
I like the accent that's been portrayed.
This concludes the introduction. We will now test.
It's far too top-endy. I certainly wouldn't want to go back to this. Stylistically, it might not have been the worst choice at that time. Obviously, I was trying to convey a different story through the production, but I'm happy with the changes, and I certainly wouldn't go back to the way it was. Let's have a look at the synth introduction and see what's changed. So this is the 2019 left synth introduction.
Now the right.
Now the left. Now the right. Right, 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 right.
Let's have a listen to the 2020 version to see how that sounds.
And now the right.
Wow, what a difference. So this is the 2019 version.
Now the left. Now the left. Now the left.
So you can hear that that voice is clearly being down-pitched, but it's not being done particularly well because it doesn't have any of the low frequencies that you would associate with a lower-pitched voice.
And now the right.
Whereas the down-pitching I've done in the 2020 version actually has some depth to it.
Now the left.
Whereas that 2019 version is just a little bit fake.
Now the left.
It's clearly not been done so well. That's down to the production tools I was using at the time, plugins and such. Little Alter Boy is a fantastic plugin that really does work. Whereas in this one, I've actually got the Pro Tools session. I can show you what I was using for the tool to downpitch there. Yeah, I was using Waves Sound Shifter, which clearly doesn't do as good a job as Little Alter Boy in terms of frequency response, pushing them down and actually correctly modulating them.
Now the left. And now the right.
It's night and day, that difference.
Now the right. 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 Right.
So there's one thing that annoys me with that there is that the vocals are being delayed out of sync with the song. I find that infuriating. It's really distracting for me.
Now the right. 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 Right.
And the thing that further frustrates me is I'm not properly low passing that. You can hear the plosive of the T as I'm down pitching that.
Now the right. 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 Right.
It's this bit here that really frustrates me. It's these pronounced T's. They're present for the entire thing. That's something I would have noticed now at the moment straight away. I really don't like that. What about the texture of the synth itself? Very clean. It has the nice texture that I like. Okay, let's have a listen to the same section in the 2020 version.
And now the right.
It's not that the 2019 version's bad, it just suits a different style of production. Whereas the story I'm trying to tell here is clearly one of character and a tired synthesizer. Whereas this 2019 version, while the pitch is still tied to an LFO, and it's still moving up and down, the semiotic property of that being tired and worn out isn't backed up by how clean the top end and definition is. It's just so clean. There's no loss in resolution of the highest frequencies. You see they go all the way up to 20k and they do die off a little bit, but it's nowhere remotely close to the semiotic story that I'm telling here. It's just so much more stylistic and characterful. Before we get into the chorus, let's have a little listen to the drop. Yeah, so that's quite a weak drop. What I'm really doing there is, obviously I can see there might be a slight amount of filtering, maybe a high pass filter coming in very slightly, just around this area here, because you can see, there's a lack of bass in this bit, and it seems to fade off ever so slightly, just like that, And then all I'm doing is I'm just coming in with the drop, with the chorus, but it just doesn't feel like it has enough of a punch. The transience isn't there, whereas in the 2020 version, I have used a much better technique. Let's have a little listen.
This concludes the introduction.
That break from the repetition of the section really helps. I find it to be a lot better. And I think that the transience of that entry for the chorus is so much better. Now, one thing I will say is that in the 2020 version, it takes 1 minute and 20 seconds to get to the chorus, whereas in the 2019 version, it takes 2 minutes and 10 seconds. In the 2019 version, each instrument seems to be overlapping in their EQ distribution quite a bit. While you can hear the guitar and it is filling out a space, when I got to do the 2020 rearrangement, I felt that the guitar was too muddy to be involved in the chorus, especially with all the other elements I was trying to add in. So what I ended up doing was keeping the guitar exclusively for the outro, and then the brass come in with that later on. And so my choice then as a producer to vary the arrangement a little bit to provide some clarity was a good one. And obviously it wasn't a decision I was able to make at the time. I wanted to have everything in. It wasn't worth keeping in because I remember having the difficult choice of removing it from that section because I really wanted to hear the guitar in that section. And what I've accidentally done is I've degraded the quality of all the other elements in that section just to hear the guitar. And it's a much better decision to hear the guitar in the 2020 version on its own with the brass rather than chucked into the chorus where I initially wanted it. It's just a shame that my mixing skills for achieving that balance between the instruments weren't quite present at that point in the song. Let's have a look at the integrated LUFS. That is the continuous rolling average of the volume. There's not that much variation. I appreciate that in the start it's a little bit quieter on average and then it comes up quite a lot once we get into it. If we look at the short term, there's a lot of ups and downs, but the integrated volume doesn't change that much. The standard of integrated volume was originally created, as far as I'm aware, for the CAM Act in Europe, and that was to standardise advert volume so that if you finish watching a programme, the advert that immediately follows that isn't insanely loud by comparison. And so there is some grounding in human perceptions and how this integrated volume, especially the short-term volume, are calculated. It's not purely based on the binary data that's in your computer. It's a perceptive thing as well. So if we look at the integrated volume for the 2019 version, there's not that much happening. Whereas if we look at the 2020 version, there is a much higher dynamic range. It goes all the way down to minus 27.8. So the same top line, but a much deeper dynamic range, and there's a lot more variation. And that means if you're a listener, you have to put the volume up a little bit more to hear that introduction with complete clarity. But when you get to the loudest part, it has that punch. But if you're not careful and you overdo it, it can be quite frightening to listen to. I'm much happier with looking at this dynamic range. We're working in a 24-bit dimension, so why shouldn't we utilise as much of the dynamic range as producers as we can? We'll just skip to the outro to see what that's doing. Let's have a listen to the 2019 outro first. Wow, that's quite interesting. So you can hear at the start of that outro there, it has that tape wind up effect, which is the exact same technique that I used in the introduction of the synth in the 2020 version. When it pitches up, it speeds up. I don't think I ever wanted to do that consciously. It's clearly a stylistic choice that I feel I have better implemented in the 2020 version. In the 2019 version, the pitch up, while it's really nice, the texture's lovely, it doesn't have any other semiotic hints, it's just a pitch. Whereas in the 2020 version, it's accompanied by a mechanical switch or button press, and also a whirring of cassette motors or tape motors. So semiotically, I feel like my referencing is a lot more pinpoint. Anyone listening to that would immediately imagine or come to the conclusion that that is a reference of a mechanical unit designed to play a cassette or a tape. Whereas in this one, it's quite simply just a pitch effect. And yes, it does have references on its own, but when you add in multiple layers to that, the reference becomes much more concrete and easier for people to immediately recognise. And maybe that's not always what you want, but for me, I feel this is a better referencing I've done in the 2020 version compared to this one in the 2019 version. Now that bit I really like. I really like the temporal and pitch adjustments that are happening there at the end of that section. But the thing that ruins it is that kick. It just doesn't have the right tonality for me. And you can see the clickiness in the waveform. You can hear it, by God. That noise you can hear is the kick. So that's the kick on its own. It's far too clicky for me. I just don't like it. So what we can do is we can put a high shelf on or a low pass filter. I think that sounds way better, just even cutting off everything above 500 Hz. Yeah, that's way better as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, it's a shame back then that I didn't cut off the clickiness of the kick, because it really distracts me from what I want to be listening to, and that's the synth there, because there's a lovely tape effect happening. I'm using J37. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the delay times that are independent for the left and right channels and I'm snapping them back to 1 millisecond. So it's a real shame that all I can hear when I listen back to this version is that click. So I think that's everything I want to talk about today. It's really interesting for me to see how much I've improved in the last year alone. Certainly my mastering techniques have improved a lot and getting the clarity that I want and the balance. But even beyond just the balance and the dynamics of the piece, never mind the effects I'm using, I think that the clarity and the interest of my mixes have improved themselves. I'm trying to now build in character into my productions because I want these songs and tracks that I'm producing to be personified, to live and breathe. One thing that I really love about Home, or Randy Goff, has two fantastic tracks that I reference a lot when I'm doing synth work. Renaissance, of course, is the gold standard for any electronic music, and We're Finally Landing. I would play them, but I feel I would get copyright striked immediately by automated systems. What Randy Goff really does well with these is it's not just the music itself. He includes imperfections. He includes the motorized hums. If we listen to the very start of We're Finally Landing, just for a few seconds, you can hear there's a hum in the background. It's not just about the perfect tonality of the musical notes itself. There's a story, there's a character. So you can hear there, just for the first 3 seconds, all he's doing is he's letting you hear the motorized hum of something. You can listen to Resonance yourself, but even when he comes in with these really lush chords, you can hear there's a hum at the top, there's some noise. It's not all just about the notes, it's also about the story they tell and the quality and the characteristics of whatever's playing them. A violin isn't just about the perfect tones, it's also about the texture of the string, the bow. There's more to music than just the notes itself, and that's part of what I'm now trying to achieve. I'm trying to implement the soul into my music. And so to end this video, I will leave you with the outro to my 2020 calibration. Thanks very much for listening. See you soon.
Thank you for calibrating with Caledonia Sound.